Hello and welcome everybody to the next webinar organized by the Multiculturalism and Migration Observatory, which is devoted to the topic of highly skilled migrants in Kraków. My name is Dobrosława Wiktor Mach, and together with Konrad Pędziwiat, we'll be moderating the meeting. Today we have the pleasure to have a special guest speaker, Ewa Ślęzak from our university, Krakow University of Economics, who is the author of the monograph entitled Corporate Mobility, the Case of Kraków. Ewa Ślęzak is associate professor at the head of the Department of Economics at the Krakow University of Economics. Her research interests include labor market, migration, welfare state, aging society, and global political economy. She has participated in multiple international research projects, including projects co-financed by the European Commission, addressing youth unemployment in the European Union, information society, informal work, social economy, and support for the elderly workers. And we are very, very happy to hear about the topic of highly skilled migrants and hopefully to have a discussion later on. As our observatory has begun a research project on the homemaking practices of this particular group of migrants who live and work in Kraków. So our hope is to develop this topic from maybe more sociological perspective and to contribute to this topic, which Ewa was researching recently and will present us today. The plan for the webinar is as follows. So at first, Ewa will present her topic, and then there will be time for a Q&A session. But if someone has any question which pop up during the presentation, so there is something that you want to comment or ask, there is an option to use chat window for that. But of course, there will be a chance to ask questions directly to our speaker after the presentation. And just one technical remark, as usually we record the webinar, and this webinar will be posted on the Observatory's YouTube channel. So in case you want to, there is someone who misses the webinar and wants to watch it later, there will be a chance. But please also keep this in mind. So if someone prefers not to be recorded, you may switch off the camera if that is your wish. So I don't want to take more time, and I want to welcome Ewa once more and very cordially to our seminar, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dobrosława. Thank you, Konrad. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. At the very beginning, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to present my habilitation book, but also some parts of my research that I will explain later on. And at this point, I want to, if it's possible, I would like to also welcome all the participants, in particular my former PhD supervisor, Professor Anna Karwińska, and colleagues and friends who actually found time to participate in this meeting. To be honest, I'm quite thrilled, and I'm really looking forward to the fruitful discussions which I hope we're gonna have. The plan is that I will present the approach that I've noted throughout numerous research or quasi-research projects that I've conducted related to the migration and the approach of the Krakow's authorities to the migrations. I can't change I'm sorry.
If you click on the slide. Maybe.
Yes, I can see it now. Thank you. So just as an explanation, what I'm going to present is my attempt to combine the research finding that I presented in the book that Dobrusia has already talked about, But also I'm going to add some research findings which have been published or are in the process of publishing. So in general, the idea behind this presentation is to scrutinize the approach of the Krakow's authorities in regards to shaping its approach in the sense of both actions but also policies towards migrants. But as already mentioned in the title, it's going to focus mainly on the high-skilled migrants. And I had a very sort of specific group which I analyzed, which were basically the employees of the transnational corporations. I will explain in a moment why. It is so as a part of the book, I try to develop my own concept of the corporate mobility, which basically was referring to the mobility of high-skilled migrants. Yes, so in that sense, we would see those corporate migrants as a sort of segment of these high-skilled migrants. Those people who would be related and who would be workers or employees of transnational corporations. But this was also quite an interesting time when I was writing that book, because I came across numerous typologies addressing those high-skilled migrants who had the connections with the transnational corporations, yes? So because most of us would think about those who work for transnationals initially as being expatriates, yes? But also the expatriates are not a very homogeneous group. In fact, they are very heterogeneous group, even, and there's quite a number of various typologies and classifications of those. Not to forget that their mobility is one of the concept which is in fact undergoing a profound change. One of the typologies which I find very relevant also to the present times and the certain nomadism that we observe is the typology of the late John Ery, and which in fact is very much now triggered during the pandemic, yes, where the when the late John Ery actually introduced those concepts of virtual mobility, which shows us certain mobility of individuals, which does not involve a physical movement and refers to the certain connection that individuals would have with the machines, and they would travel with the use of the machines, and as we would suspect with the internet. As most of us know, we've been going through that process. Yes, we've been very much involved in recent 2 years in that virtual mobility, and this was actually the type of mobility which was also very much utilized by the transnational corporations. That, of course, does not mean that the physical mobility of within transnational corporations was stopped. It was to a certain degree perhaps reduced, and it was very much changing. And also referring to John Ery's perspective, this imaginary mobility is also very much the case, as we would simply witness, or we would basically see various events or incidents, or participate in the life or in the activities of others through the lenses of initially first the television, but also for the younger generations, internet has the similar role. So we have that sort of duality when it comes to the use of internet. Somehow, like you would refer to original ideas of Heidegger, that it was initially the radio set which reduced and stopped the boredom of the households. Then this role was taken by the television set, and in present times it is also the internet. Nonetheless, the mobility as a concept is a very wide and a very complex concept. And here, of course, I would focus predominantly on the physical mobility involving individuals who work for transnational corporations and who obviously are a segment of the high-skilled migrants. In terms of methods, because this might be a bit tricky. When I approached the topic of corporate mobility, I realized one thing, that as much as the topic might be very challenging and very interesting, I might have a huge problem with finding numerical data, with finding the statistics. On one hand, because quite a number of mobility within the corporation involves mobility which is referring to the employees, so it's done within sort of internal labor markets of corporations, and it's very difficult to find information on that. For example, even in the financial statements of the companies, I've run a few analyses of financial statements, expecting that there would be some information, for example, in the notes, yes, at the very back of financial statements. No such information was actually there. I've tried to find such information within the statistical offices. That was, and I tried, that wasn't available. And I tried to also access that information directly through some companies, and it was not the case. It wasn't something that they wanted to share. Yes, they decided, but this is also one part of that mobility. The second was that you would have a number of individuals who are so-called, for example, self-initiated expatriates, those who individually seek employment, who would travel, and then they would find employment within the transnational in a given place, which again, in many cases, if they are, for example, if it's the EU country like in Poland, and if they are the EU member state citizens, this escapes the information, and it's very, usually it's not recorded. So in that sense, it's very difficult. Another aspect which I suspected when I approached this topic, I had a feeling that the authorities focus on certain parts of its activity and very often don't see the whole sort of process. And having also the experience and working on some analysis of Małopolska for ESPON, I came across the process tracing method. And this was a method which would involve analysis based on the causation mechanism and trying to see the relationship. And so I came up perhaps with a bit naive question, which I thought was something that I could perhaps test. So whether the presence of transnationals could have positive impact on corporate mobility. A bit naive question, because we suspect that this is the case, yes, but I looked at it also from the perspective of involvement of public authorities, NGOs, in attempt to raise attractiveness, and then the investors' decisions, yes, who create workplaces in a given place. In our case, it was Krakow. So this was the causation mechanism which I introduced, and I started to gather various information and started to collect that information as a sort of externalization process, to see whether we can, through certain data and statistics, whether we can actually verify that that thesis. And next, on the top of that, I carried out the fieldwork, which was a qualitative fieldwork. These were the expert interviews and the interviews with the migrants, just for the migrants, just to compare this perception and to juxtapose that. Part of that of those analyses were also used also for later research and later analysis. Why did I choose Krakow? Yes, of course. Why this case is so special? Yes, of course. The first question, I come from here, so I know the place pretty well. I've done quite a bit of research on the place, but also if you look at Krakow, Krakow is very specific. Okay, outside this perception that this is a former capital, it's an old city, it's a seat of rather vibrant region in terms of what's happening in the region. It also belongs to the so-called circuits of the global economy. And this is very much confirmed by numerous rankings. One of them, very famous one, is the Tollens one, yes? And Krakow continues to have one of the top positions in the world. From the perspective of the city, of course, we cannot compare Krakow to New York, to London, or to Tokyo, which are obviously global cities, how Saskia Sassen would call it. But from the business perspective and from the perspective how it actually manages to attract business and investors, it's quite, you can quite strongly agree that it could be considered as an example of almost global city, yes? So if you look at the situation in Krakow, of course, there's loads of investment in the support to the knowledge-based economy. The infrastructure throughout a number of years has been has improved largely, and this actually attracts the private investments and investors. But on the top of that, Krakow is also considered to be the city of the, on one hand, innovative industry, and there's a number of statistics and confirming that, and also it is a place of creative industries. Yes, of course, these two can develop and can flourish thanks to the well-educated human capital, which is generated by the universities. As we all know, Krakow is the place where we would have quite a high number of universities involved in this process. But also from the perspective of the investors, the labor here is still relatively cheap in comparison to other places, in particular other European countries. So in that sense, we would see that there is a favorable environment and infrastructure for various users, but from the perspective of stakeholders like investors, migrants, tourists, even students, it is a very attractive place to be. Moreover, as we would see, the policymakers and decision makers started to notice that there is a certain need to focus also on the migration, yes, because migration is especially migration of high-skilled migrants is very much related to the activity of those offshoring companies. And also the fact that those offshoring companies are changing, there is a certain shift in their activity as they change from being purely business process outsourcing places, where very often originally very simple processes were moved and were undertaken, there is a certain shift towards research and development. And along with that, there is a certain pull for individuals from all across the world who would come and who would work here. So from that perspective, we will see a certain change, which is also noted by those in charge of policy making. So in the book, I presume those two, that the city authorities would undertake the actions to increase the attractiveness of the city and to encourage investors to come here. And this, my suspicion was that this would have a positive impact on mobility. But what I also suspected and what I feared was, it was a couple of years ago, that then migrants were seen a bit like a byproduct of those decisions. Yes, so you have like a major focus on the business orientation, and migration and encouragement of high-skilled migrants to come to Krakow somehow happened on the way. Yes. Interestingly, with some time then, when I started to work on the policies, and when I added this policy perspective, I noted, and this is also what I suspected happened, that the city makes certain attempts to create its own independent policy, to undertake independent actions. On one hand, to make sure that it provides favorable conditions, also having in mind that it has a favorable location, its business position is quite strong, it has very good academic environment, and as a result, it would present a very specific policy mix of both business approach, but also the migration approach. And this approach towards migrant is actually very much evolving in attempt to fill in certain existing policy gaps. Yes. But also in the same time, you'd see that there is an attempt to strengthen the favorable business position of the city. But then analyzing the context and looking at it from various perspectives, of course, I realized that the context of the analysis is very complex, and it is in fact multi-layered. Yes, one thing which was striking, and which I thought at the very beginning, was of course the evolution of transnational companies. Yes, with the growth of the fragmentation processes and cutting them between the countries to make the best possible use of the human resources at the place, which of course involved need for mobility of individuals. Yes, and that mobility was predominantly physical. Of course, those stays abroad were quite diversified. You would have either short stay, long stay, etc., depending upon the need of the company. So this was quite an obvious initial start of the discussion, how the companies invigorate, and also enhance the mobility of individuals. But also then I noted that in the field of migration, we have quite an interplay between the various stakeholders. What I expected at the very beginning was that there would be in the play the city authorities, the employers, investors, NGOs, often NGOs, for example, gathering the employers, but also the migrants, etc. But then I realized you should perhaps into this interplay also incorporate the state. I will say in a moment why. The second aspect, the third aspect was the evolution of the city approach to migrants, which we actually observe. And once we analyze, we actually see that to be quite strong and vivid. Finally, from that policy perspective, you cannot really forget about the migration crisis and the anti-immigration rhetoric, which actually became very strong across the region, not only in Poland, and also in some other countries on the continent. So with that interplay between the stakeholders, which I had already mentioned, of course, all those stakeholders would play quite a role in attracting migrants, yes? And some of the activity would be quite diverse in the sense that some would be focusing on the raising attractiveness, others would be dealing with support to investors and assuring their well-being or care for the migrants. So introducing multiculturalism into the policies, yes. But all the city authorities usually undertake one of the three approaches in most countries, yes. They either try to independently formulate their policies. They would be also, some of them would be focusing on implementation of the state policies. Still, in some cases, you would see that some leave themselves space for interpretation of solution. This is due to this decentralization. And finally, you have a third approach, which involves that certain interaction, cooperation between the state and the local authorities. Yes, so we would discuss Krakow how it actually handles that in a moment. On the other hand, this evolution of the approach of the cities towards migrants. Usually, also in the literature, it's mentioned that there are usually two approaches. Either it treats migrants more favorably than the state, yes, so you have this space that the state might be quite treat them as foes, but still the city, if once we analyze the city, addresses them in a certain very positive manner. And it could be the other way around. The cities can disfavor migrants and even exclude them to the more degree than the state and the state regulations. I thought that in the case of Krakow, it could be, especially a few years ago, it could be also a slightly different perspective in the sense that migrants as a group, some time ago, they were to a certain degree neglected, yes? They were there, but we were not that much interested in them. And they were seen as the byproduct, yes? So the main focus was, again, on the investors, on the business support, whereas migrants were seen as a sort of complementary to that business orientation. And I will discuss it in a moment. Finally, as mentioned, that political perspective. We've been there and we've lived here or in the region in past few years. So all of us remember that the migration crisis, which was caused initially by the war in Syria, which was actually an element which actually brought about quite a strong formulation of anti-immigration politics, which emerged across the EU member states. It was the case that it was very dominant in the Central and Eastern European countries. And it was this anti-refugee rhetoric was very strong and was also very much discussed. But it wasn't only the case in the former communist states, yes. So it was also the case in the EU member states, and the politicians very often seem to be a bit grounded in the xenophobia and racism. Of course, in some countries it was more acceptable or more accepted. In others, it wasn't accepted at all. But still, this to various degree had impact on the policies formulated in given countries. In our case, on the top of that, we had the war in Ukraine, which actually resulted also with quite an influx of the migrants. In the case of Poland, was once how we see it, the recent years actually changed the situation and the approach of the state towards migration as such. On one hand, we would see that we live in the context of the state having no coherent, in the sense of officially approved document. So in terms of the policy, it's not coherent. We don't have officially approved common document or integrated approach. Yes, we had the, in 2018 brings the dismantling of the previous document, then then in next years we have the new documents which are being presented, but which are very highly criticized by the academic circles and those involved in migration studies. And for sure, we can see that we lack a certain coordinated approach of the government and the legislators. On the other hand, you would see that certain actions prove that there is certain policy, in the sense that you have a number of actions which support the emergence of labor market gaps and allowing the migrants, in particularly from the former Soviet states, in particular from Ukraine. So in the same time, we are witnessing, last few years is the period when we are actually witnessing the influx of migrants. And this is perhaps a certain stimuli for the local authorities, where those migrants come, to take care of them and to deal with them, to create a certain environment, certain welcoming, but also supporting environment for the migrants. By no means, this is very interesting. When I started that research also about the policies, my impression was that Krakow was one probably of the best developed cities in terms of the various solutions and actions towards migrants. Still, last years, that there was something happening. Yes, even if it's a byproduct, but something started to happen. But then I noted that it's not considered to be such a front runner. It's considered to be quite active, but not the leader. Yes, in that sense, because Krakow, just like most of the cities, using on the basis of the Act of on Principles of Planning Development policy from 2006, can formulate its strategies and policy documents. Yes, and this is the place, and this is the element that Krakow also uses. And to a certain degree, not very big, you will see some relationship to migrations. Yes, but of course, if it's the main focus is on the development, as you would expect, in the strategy, in the present strategy, but also in the previous strategy of the city, but also in the strategies of the region, the focus is on the business orientation. Yes, there are some indications or inclinations related to migrations. But on the other hand, the president of the city, just like other president, has signed a number of declarations which prove a certain cooperation with other cities, and it actually proves that the issue of migration is being very much discussed. Yes, so they signed the declaration in relationship to cooperation of the cities in the area of migrations, or that one of the declaration was referring to the openness and intercultural dialogue. Yes, which indicates that there's a place in the policies, but you would expect that there will be certain actions in relationship to that. On the top of that, also in Krakow, there is a platform for communication and for accessing information, the Open Krakow, or the center that we are at the moment. Yes, which we would consider the certain platform for exchange and research. Yes, where you would have people from different backgrounds and with different experience to discuss certain things. There are, of course, some practical aspects which are taking place, like the NGOs are taking undertaking certain actions in relationship to support to the migrants, or they implement certain projects, or you have, for example, the multicultural school in terms of education, which supports migrants. However, when you would see and you would analyze it from the policy perspective and from the perspective of the documents, you would ask yourself, where are the migrants here? Yes, because on one hand, in those strategies and policy documents, the emphasis is on the investor business orientations. Yes, on the other hand, there is this second part of the element that you would have those declarations, or specific actions, specific bodies, yes, for the migrants, which indicates that the migration here is a primary process. Yes, it's so the migrants are primary here. However, what is from my perspective worrisome is perhaps the fact that there's the address towards migrants per se. Yes, so it's not contextualized to different subgroups, which we are, for example, interested now that you would have certain approaches towards high skilled or low skilled. Yes, so it's more like the approach. The question is perhaps why. Yes. And I've used some of the interviews which I ran just to show what are the strong sides and what are the weak sides of Krakow from the perspective of the policymakers and the NGOs, but also to compare it with the migrants' perspectives. It's just a few excerpts that I used, and obviously you'll see that there's quite an awareness of the fact that the city is the core to the modern economy, and its position in the region is very strong. But on the other hand, what's been highlighted, for example, by SPY is the fact that we as locals, we might not be aware of the certain additional value that the place has. And from the business, even from the business perspective, so that would suggest that it's to a certain degree unutilized, that perhaps it's from the regional, but also from the state perspective, a certain hub in the south of Poland could be built, which could incorporate other cities like Katowice, quite a neighboring one, but also even Wrocław. But still, so it could be a certain corridor, even reaching to Rzeszów, yes, and covering the whole of the south of the country. But no doubt this position is also very much grounded on the educational side. From the weak sides, you would obviously see that this business orientation of the policymakers, whether these are the city policymakers, but also the regional policymakers, it also changes certain focus of the authorities. And it's been highlighted, for example, by employers' organization, by Leviathan, that quite a number of people who come from traditional sectors of the economy feel somehow neglected or forgotten, in the sense that most of the funding is addressing innovation, yes, innovative or creative activity, which could be a certain loss in the future and to the future position of Krakow, but also to a certain degree of the region, yes. On the other hand, also the NGOs, the representatives of the transnational argue that the communication is not the best with the policymakers, and perhaps this has the explanation lies in, on one hand, linguistics, on the other hand, in the cultural side, in the sense that it's difficult to listen to those people from outside, and there is a certain need for improving of communication. Otherwise, it will result in people leaving the place. Yes, so in certain losses. On the other hand, it's interesting to see how the migrants would see the city and whatever is being done by the city. And this is very interesting that quite a number, these were all young people working for transnationals. Out of those four that I used the excerpts from their interviews, none of them is in Poland anymore, because I have them on LinkedIn. Most at least those four, and I know that they have already left, even though some of them were very much into staying here and into settling. Yes, because some said directly that they might feel left alone. Yes, that they would need certain attention from the authorities, from the local authorities, but still they noticed certain specifics or certain drawbacks of the city, to a certain degree of the countries, like they mentioned the conservatives, nationalists, certain racism, yes, but still they appreciated the opportunities that they had in the business life, yes, in the companies that they worked for, and the life that they could run, which in many cases turned out to be even better, for example, than in the case of Alt here, than when it would be for him in France. Yes, still they appreciated the fact that it was a very sort of young, and it was the place which was very, very vibrant. On the other hand, they also experienced certain loneliness, and they experienced that it was very difficult to integrate. You would see here also, this was, for example, Italian who came from Lombardia and worked for the bank, for the Swiss bank, but he was treating Krakow just like any other big European cities. He had an option to either come and to work in Madrid, Krakow, or in Berlin, and he finally chose Krakow. And for him, it was a very interesting experience. But sadly, he has left as a part of relocation to Switzerland. Yes, as a part of the next career move. And finally, the last one is again Italian, who's now working for Moody's in London. Yes, so his career evolved very much, but he was when he was referring to this perception of Poland and also Krakow. Before he came, he had this idea that his parents and grandparents shared with him, where they talked about the poverty, the war, the Nazi occupation, and the ex-communism. But then when he came, he absolutely loved it, and he found it very, very exciting. But still, it seems that he treated that as another step for his business, for his professional development, which again indicates that perhaps if more attention was given also to people like that, perhaps they would have stayed in Krakow. So in conclusion, initially, when I analyze, and also it's very much pointed to in the book, the initial approach of the city to migrants was quite scarce, and to a certain degree, they seemed to be neglected. Yes, from that perspective, if you would see the process, yes, the impact of the transnationals on the increasing mobility. So in that sense, you would see that this was the case, but most of the policymakers were not looking in that sort of wide perspective. They were focusing on those areas which were related either to predominantly on the business orientation, but also extending the analysis in the policy context, also comparing that with other cities, perhaps added some flavor. And it actually proves that Krakow is acting similarly to other cities in the country. It fills certain gaps in the migration policy in Poland. And to a certain degree, we might suspect that the state is just turning a blind eye, that the cities are doing that work related to the running or introducing the migration policy on the local level. And this approach that the cities would be using, and this is also the case of Krakow, is very much linked to its strong points. Yes, the strong points, as we have already mentioned, this business position, this business orientation, which in turn brings and attracts high-skilled migrants. Yes, and to that degree, we would also see that there is this diversity of actions, and migrants can actually choose from them. Yes, they are not being targeted, but there is this sort of choice that they can make. In terms of policy recommendations, I think it's still very important to allow for more coordinated approach. Yes, so taking into account the suggestions of the various stakeholders, to contextualize more actions, yes, to the needs, but also to perhaps to allow for more action from cities authorities, which surely know much better what's needed in their case than the state authorities. But perhaps we'll see how this changed, because perhaps this is the idea that the state is not going to introduce a very sort of coordinated, closed approach in terms of migration policy, but it's going surely to allow cities to deal how they want to, or it will move to a completely different direction. It will close the opportunity to formulate and to implement that policy in that area. That is still to come. So thank you so much. This is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewa, for your fascinating presentation. I think you have covered the topic, which is really so much under-researched. So much is being now discussed about migration processes. There is so much going on. And at the same time, we still see that there is really a lack of real empirical knowledge on different aspects of migration. So, so your research is really, I think, very, very valuable contribution, both to the empirical, our knowledge on this particular group of migrants, highly skilled migrants, but also the theoretical and conceptual discussions. I would like to begin now a Q&A session. I think there are many topics that can be developed and asked and discussed. So is there any question to Ewa and to the topic of presentation or any topic?
I may ask actually a question concerning the policy dimension. We hear from the central authorities that they are planning on the new migration policy. And at the same time, there was an interesting initiative taken by the NGO sector to formulate some of the most important elements of the prospective Polish migration policy. I wonder what is your point of view about these proposals made by the Polish NGOs, and also about what do you think about these plans and some of the initial documents which are appearing concerning the supposed new Polish migration policy. I wonder what is your view on that.
Okay. Are we collecting or we going one by one?
We can also collect one more, because I see that Jan has raised the hand, so maybe we can have second question altogether. Okay, Jan, please.
Yes, so I have a question and a comment. A comment is, I'm really glad that Ewa has mentioned the need of some action plans with the stakeholders to improve the situation of migrants. Actually, our Task for Camp project is aiming to do so, of course, in a very limited scale, but the municipality of Kraków is involved in this project. Together with various NGOs, and at least in this aspect of economic activities of migrants, mostly in immigrant entrepreneurship, I see that we will be able to reach some, let's say, more long-term goals than only the goals of the project itself. Now, turning to my question, I wonder, of course, because obviously your study was based on the situation in 2000, mostly 17, 18. So now, based on your research experience, let's say, how do you assess now the policy of mostly, I'm not talking about the municipality now, rather the policy of multinational companies which are now in Krakow regarding the mobility of expats. Of course, how COVID pandemic has impacted on this, and especially with regard to the remote work which is carried out in many of the multinational companies. Is it a threat for Kraków when it comes to the possible, let's say, limitation of the inflow of skilled migrants into the city, or the opposite? What is your, let's say, of course, more intuitive opinion on this topic?
Okay, thank you. If I may start with the second question, I'm actually very much looking forward to that works to see the results of the project Task for Camp, because I've noticed that there is this cooperation and involvement of various stakeholders into the processes, and in particular the NGOs, where those that I interviewed were pointing out that they were not heard to a certain degree, yes, or even if they participate in certain discussions, their voice was lost somewhere on the way. When it comes to multinational companies and the remote work, I think we will have to wait to see what will be the result in terms of the bringing together highly skilled migrants to Krakow, because it does seem that this sort of virtual mobility that Eri had discussed was the case when it comes to the activity of multinationals or transnational companies. And they very much benefited from that. So to a certain degree, all of them, they realized that perhaps we don't need to travel as much and as extensively to meet other colleagues. We don't have to spend so much money on travel. We don't have to spend so much time on travel. We don't, perhaps we don't need as much office spaces. Yes, so you would see only those benefits. But then from the perspective of the Krakow, which hosts a number of transnationals, this is of course quite a threat. And there's a fear that we're gonna have less of the people traveling and living in Krakow, even for shorter periods of time. But on the other hand, when I speak also to people working in transnationals, but my suspicion is that it's going to go back to certain mobility. Perhaps we're gonna work for some time in the remote mode, so that there's going to be some sort of hybrid approach. We're gonna work in the office, we're gonna work at homes. Still, it will attract some individuals, to highly skilled individuals, to come to Krakow. Why? We are still a safe place to live in comparison to other places where the quality of life is fairly good. Yeah, so perhaps this is the approach. I have, for example, I know that also in other countries that this mode of expatriation starts to come back to normal. Yesterday I found out that a friend of mine from Manchester, who's French, is actually going on a 3-year contract with EDF to West UX. She's going to Cameroon. And this is due to start in September. So once you start collecting information about different people who are moving on such of sort of expatriation missions, you'll see that we might see a certain pickup once we are vaccinated, that this might come back to normal or to quasi-normal. Yes, everything really depends upon the situation. But I don't think that in that sense Krakow is very much threatened by this situation. Even if you would see that most of the migrants who work for transnationals, they still stayed in Krakow even during the period of remote work. You wouldn't see, we don't have that statistics, yes, but if you see the commentaries, even on the news, we had the commentaries about other groups leaving the country. Yes, you remember when the lockdown started, we had large outflow of Ukrainian migrants back to Ukraine. Yes, we had those large queues on the border. Yes, but we didn't hear much about those people leaving the country, for example, to other European states. We didn't have such information as such, but of course we don't have the statistics. Yes, so this is what we suspect. As to Konrad's question and commentary, when it comes to the migration policy and that proposal, which was, I think it was 2019, which was as highly criticized by the academic circles, yes, I would also see that fairly outdated, yes. But still, another thing is that what I actually miss from the government, that perhaps it's not as much interested in the opinion of people working on the spot. Yes, this also refers to dealing with migrants. Yes, to listen to their opinions, listen to their observations, and somehow trying to involve it in the policy documents. But this is the reality that we are actually facing. Yes, that you might have a number of institutions, organizations which try to support and which try to, in a way, do the work for the government. Yes, but we fear that this might be work which is, of course, might be used by various academic circles, by those dealing with the migration, analyzing the migrations. But I fear that we might not see this approach of the government and incorporating certain ideas. So this process of sort of, I don't know, policy learning, of using certain other experiences might not be the case. This is my fear. Yes, but then the question is, perhaps we might not do anything, yes, but perhaps it's still better to do something, produce and try to at least start a certain discussion in various circles, because it will at least exist in some areas, even if it's not taken into account by the government.
Yeah, exactly the idea of this proposals coming up from Dr. Klaus and others, where the idea was preemptive in a way. We saw what the government produced in 2019, and it was, to say really politely and nicely, such a element of administrative rubbish that I would never expect even that something of that kind could be produced with the stamp of the ministry. That simply because of that, the NGOs decided to introduce this preemptive act. But my worry is that this will hopefully, well, there can't be anything worse than they've produced in 2019. So I think from that perspective, I hope for the better, but otherwise, yeah, we'll see what the government will come up with. Thanks for your...
Yeah, but I think also on the other hand, perhaps we are in a certain situation where better than producing something similar to 2019 is what the government doing right now, that turning the blind eye, pretending that we don't see what's happening. Let others deal with the migrants, those which are closer, like the cities.
Yeah, I agree with you to some extent, but the cities is another subject, but the lack of the policy is also an important policy in itself. Yeah. So yeah, for sure, I had a discussion about it with Margo Kulski, and definitely this is the way most of the migration scholars see the current policy of the government, lack of the policy as a policy.
Okay, I think that Jan wanted to add something because your hand is still raised. Is it, or is it
No,
the
I
old
don't
hand?
think you.
Okay, so
Sorry, my mistake. I forgot to lower my hand.
okay.
No,
So,
I'm just listening with lots of interest, but I'm listening.
okay, is there any other question from? Okay, Martin. I see Martin. Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Yeah, I would like to ask about the expectations of this specific group of migrants that are well educated, well paid, that you working on, right? And what are the expectations, for example, for, I don't know, help or support of local government, so municipality, what they would expect government to do in order to improve their situation, because it's very specific group, no? It's completely different than, for example, manual workers from Ukraine, right? So what they communicate to you during this, your interviews.
May I? Thank you, Martin. There's one interview which I lost, which I couldn't find in my computer, which I wanted actually to use some excerpts, because I had one person who specifically told me, because from the discussion and with all of them, it was striking that they want to have a very good and very sort of organized life, in the sense that it's not only a place for the work, for growing professionally, but they wanted also a very good sort of recreation potential. Yes, in the sense, Krakow, they noted that the Krakow offers quite a lot of cultural possibilities, and they noted that, of course, they can go to the mountains, it's very close, etc., etc. But still, they expected that there's going to be some sort of support in terms of more organizing their life. But on the other hand, when you look at them, they are the group that don't really require that much support. Yes, because they are mostly what? Very well educated people, who earn quite a lot of money, whose position, professional position, is usually very stable. Yes, so they can organize themselves just like we do. Yes, in that sense. But and there was also a feeling which I found very interesting, that those who had Polish spouses were pretty well integrated. This is quite obvious. Yes, you have a Polish partner, a wife or a husband, then you exist somewhere in the networks with the Polish. But those who didn't have the Polish spouse or the partner, then they were feeling disintegrated, and they, for example, said that they wanted to learn the language. Why? At first, they didn't want to learn the language, but then they realized that if either the city or even the company provided them with the classes of Polish, this would be very good for their situation, their position in the city. Because at one point, not at work, because at work, most of them, they used English, but then outside of work, they realized that Polish is quite essential to exist and to integrate. Yes, so one of the elements, apart from that recreation, certain support for recreation, was also the element related to the language. Yes, and the language was repeated several times. Of course, they realized it was quite difficult to learn. Yes, apart from all those people from Western countries, they said, oh, it is such a hassle to learn Polish, but then they said, well, but we need it if we want to live here. Yes, so this was the element which was repeated several times.
Okay, so the policy recommendation would be to actually try to introduce language opportunities for all migrants coming to Poland, right? And so
probably yes, that it's, or probably also like you would have in other countries as an element probably of integration to provide certain classes on the culture. Yes, because this would be also the basis for the integration. Yes, quite a lot of them did not, because I also asked them about, at one point, we talked also about the culture shock, and quite a lot of them, they mentioned they didn't feel the culture shock when they came to Poland, but still they noted certain differences, yes? And perhaps if they had even such seminars were allowed, perhaps this would allow them to function better. So they would feel more secure in this new environment.
I see that Professor Anna Karwińska has raised the hand, so please, you can ask the question.
I would like to recall some of the results of the research that I have been doing with Professor Przemysław Kisiel. It was similar time like Ewa's research, 2018, and then ask the question based on this comment. So our research was focused on foreign students choosing Kraków as a place for studying. So I think it's a similar group like high-skilled migrants. We've been trying to find out how they using city in terms of the space, but also in terms of social and cultural life. And what was very interesting from our point of view, that they were treating, let's say, the heritage, the historical heritage, which is our pride, I mean, us living in Kraków, that they were treating it as something obvious. They knew that Kraków is an old city, and that was part of context. What they were looking for was to be able to continue some lifestyles that are important for them, like having opportunity to practice sport, or to have many interesting places, attractive places to meet with friends, and to have those opportunities to have places that are safe, secure, not only in terms of being free from, let's say, robbers, but also secure in terms of being accepted as someone who speaks foreign language, etc. So I think that when we look at the way they were using space, it was visible that the most frequently visited places were not exactly the monuments or some other historical sites, but rather some places to go. Some of them really surprised us, but maybe it was a difference of generation, probably. So my question, Ewa, is whether you found out something similar, that the historical heritage is something which is, and it's not a big deal, it's just a part of context, it makes life nicer, but what is important, it's the quality of life, let's say, broadly understood. And that's the question, but I have one more comment, because I think that, of course, it was not a part of Ewa's research, but I think, especially from my point of view, I'm doing a lot of projects in the area of education of children and young people. So I think that it's missing in city policy. It's, of course, broader problem, not only towards high-skilled migrants, but for them it might be important, because they usually want to be in touch, in relations with local community. So I think that we have too few programs really focused on teaching or teaching to dialogue, the education for a dialogue, education for tolerance, education for being together in diverse world. I don't know whether they were talking about something like that. I mean, your respondents, but I think it's important anyhow in city policy, because I don't think that we will be less diverse in the future. Probably it's ongoing process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Most of the people that I interviewed had no children. They didn't even have wives or husbands. So they were still out of that group of migrants, majority of them were still before marriage. Let's call it this way, yes? So what was striking from the interviews was exactly like you said, Professor Karwinska, that they wanted to they observed, and this is what they wanted a high quality of life. They wanted places to go out, they wanted places to enjoy their lives, they wanted clubs, pubs, restaurants, and this is what mattered. They appreciated the fact that this is an old city with the monuments, the cultural heritage. They appreciated a bit the fact that they could go sometime to the museum, etc. But this was it wasn't their primary interest. Yes, this was something that, as you mentioned exactly from the research with Professor Kisiel, that they presume that this is in the place and they appreciate it, but this is not their main interest. Yes, so this is confirmed. On the other hand, I think there were in the sample 3 or 4 people who had children, various ages, usually children in the age of school age. And with those, they actually referred to the fact that they would expect a certain connection with the local community. Yes, that they wanted their children also to, they appreciated the fact that it was more peaceful in many respects, that it was more secure than in other countries. The education, of course, they selected the school that they sent their children to, and they appreciated the high quality of education, but they also wanted to exist and coexist with the locals, with the local community, yes? And those who had the Polish spouse, yes, it was still quite a bit easier for them, yes? But those who were completely external to much sense, yes, they said that they would appreciate if some programs like that were organized. Yes. On the other hand, I couldn't agree more with the fact that we need certain programs which are cut and for diversity, because we're gonna be even more diverse as a society. It's not going to be very homogeneous society anymore. So it's going to be more diverse, and the policies, in particular at this stage, the local policies, but hopefully sometime in the future, the national policies should address that diversity which is growing. Yes, but this is also to a certain degree we have an impact which is, I think, limited to that degree, to that to the way the policies are formulated at the moment.
Apropos the common question of Professor Karwinska, I just wanted to mention one thing. From the very beginning of the functioning of the observatory, we've been looking at the issue of the youth and particularly kids, foreign kids in the Krakow schools. And in the latest so-called demographic report, for the first time, I obtained information about the actual ethnic and national diversity of the pupils. So in the last report, which you can find, I'll just post a link to this online, you will find information. So for the first time, we actually know how this diversity looks like. So we knew how many pupils foreign were there, but we didn't know really about the, for example, the diversity and the elements of ghettoization of certain kids from certain groups in given schools. So these are new information which we will be analyzing also in the future. Thank you very much for raising this issue, which is very important. I'm giving it back to the Professor now.
I don't see any further questions. So if there are none, I would like to thank everyone, thank Ewa especially for sharing your fascinating research and giving us many topics to think about, because it's a topic that has the future for research as well. So thank you very, very much, and thank you everyone for listening and taking part in the discussion. Because now it's the holiday time approaching, we have not planned many activities for the coming time, but another seminars will be announced on our websites of the Observatory, on Facebook and on our main website. So please, in chat window, you can find the links if you are interested in our further works. I hope we will manage also to contribute to this topic of highly skilled migrants. And as we have just begun qualitative research, and also we want to research more the practices of those people and to see their life in Krakow more from the perspective of everyday life, which would, I think, be complementary to what you ever have done in your research. So all announcements and all things will be online, and the recording will be in a couple of days, should appear on our YouTube channel. So it will be available for everyone. So thank you very much, everyone, once again, and have a good holiday and see you afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for interesting questions. Thank you.